Welcome back to the Detections Podcast with your host, Exiled Atreides, and
Understudy 77.
I saw something pretty cool on Twitter recently, didn't you?
I did see cool stuff on Twitter. But should we save that? We should save that.
We've got something cooler to start with, I think.
We got to build anticipation, right? Like that's how you get stuff. Like, last episode we definitely nailed the start controversy, gain listeners. Now we got to start building anticipation. Tonight at 7, we're going to tell you this amazing thing that will help you lose weight. And then just like
not
wait.
Do it.
It'll be sprinkled in with specific words throughout the next 10 episodes. So if you want the secret, that's how you're going to get it.
Drink your Ovaltine, right?
No. We can't tell them. We have to give one word per episode at random points. Yeah. Okay, anyway.
Well, the cool thing, we got some new stuff coming in, don't we?
We got some new stuff that came in.
Oh, that's right.
Well, I haven't. You don't yet. But you will soon.
Yes. I got some patches and stickers, finally.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've had the stickers for a little while. And then we were waiting for the patches. The patches just came in. And they're freaking awesome. And if anybody knows, I'm like for anybody who actually knows me in real life, I'm kind of a swag whisperer. Like, I freaking love swag. Like, I love challenge coins. They're probably my favorite thing in the world. Stickers I like because I stick them all over my server rack. And patches, are all over my backpack. And I'm going to quote my wife for a second here, okay? My backpack is the thing about me, externally, with the most personality. So, I mean, I take it as a compliment. I think probably other people would take it as an insult. But I don't care. I love my backpack that's full of patches and pins, so I'm very happy to have some detection patches that I can stick on those backpacks.
I mean, your vape pen is pretty full of personality, too.
That's not even one of the nice ones, man. Like, I've had some of the ones that I've had are made of stabilized wood. My favorites are koa because I love koa. So I'm a weird technical person. Okay, you're gonna put me on a tangent already.
Do it.
I'm a weird technical person in the sense that I love technology, and my office is the weirdest, just most perfectly amalgamated version of who I am as a human being. Because for anybody who hears the hum, sitting directly to my left is a half server rack. And then a giant 6-foot by 6-foot desk filled with technology and computers and Raspberry Pis and all kinds of crap, right? And then on all my shelves are action figures because I fucking love toys. And then off to my left is a vinyl player. Because I love vinyl and I love wood. My desk is bamboo with walnut accents. I love wood grain and I love everything about that kind of stuff. And I love vinyl and I like all that. I like expensive, well-made spinning tops made out of rare metals, which is a really weird thing. Custom made knives, that shit that lasts forever.
Mm-hmm.
I like just as much as I like technology. So I kind of walk that line between those two things. And my office shows all of it. And my love of cartoons and action figures and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Mega Man Battle Network and Kevin Smith and Zelda and all that crap.
It's all good. And now you have detections patches to throw in there.
I do. I actually have them on my wall because I have a whole little section on my wall that has patches, and I have them on both backpacks. But that's why when you make a crack about the vape pen, I say, yeah, I've had several koa wood mods, vaping mods. And I've had several of other different kinds of wood as well. And that's super cool.
Yeah.
But not that, the stickers and the patches. So here's the thing. Exile, you don't get out much. So if you want them from him, good luck. For me, I'll be at Nova Hackers. Hold on. I actually have to do this in podcast time. I'll be at Nova Hackers tomorrow or for today for a lot of you who might be listening to this since, Sunday, then Monday. And then I'll be at ShmooCon and I will have swag with me at ShmooCon. So if you are interested in swag, find me at ShmooCon or Nova Hackers and be like, hey man, I want some swag. And then I can probably give you some swag.
Yeah, for me, I don't really have the plans right now. There's a few talks that I've floated out there to see what places I can go. I'll definitely end up back at B-Sides PDX at the end of the year. I may make it to DEF CON this year for my first year, but there's going to be a lot of I just haven't had the opportunity to figure out when, where yet. But stay tuned because there will be places that I will be around. Most likely on the West Coast because West Coast is best coast. Whoop, whoop.
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all.
We have another pretty interesting, exciting announcement for the podcast too, because we're going to weekly. So we started a Patreon also.
Yeah, I don't know if that's so much as exciting as it is like, hey, podcasts are fucking expensive and we'd be happy if you gave us a little bit of money. We don't expect anything. And like, I want to make that very clear. Like, there's no general expectation that anybody is going to donate anything to us. Like, we would do this either way. I always feel weird about even asking, but like, I also learned that like podcasts are kind of fucking expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So we set up a Patreon. If you're so inclined, feel free to drop us $1 or $2. Kind of help pay for some of the hosting expenses or some of the other expenses from the podcast. And we would be eternally grateful. Probably find a way to get you swag, and you can get into a like special channel in the DPS Discord just to talk about detection stuff and help vote on topics and shit for the show.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that if you do have a Discord account and you get on, we do have a special channel on the Dead Pixel Sex server. And it's not just that, but there is kind of like a undocumented perk that happens for people on that channel
you
too.
You can't tell people that. That's a secret. That's a secret perk.
I may leak, quote unquote, leak a sample of this undocumented perk sometime in the next quarter.
That's fair. We can do that.
Yeah.
But
now,
so
I do have... I was
Go
going to say, I want to interrupt you because I do have a kind of a really exciting surprise that I wanted to let you know about.
Okay.
You know how I told you I was going to work with some friends and some musicians that I know to try to get some intro, outro music for the podcast?
Yeah.
I'm getting the first rough cut from one of them this weekend.
That's cool. That makes more editing for me. But it will mean that we have an awesome intro.
Yeah, and that's, making us seem like we're professionals even though we know we aren't, having a little bit of music on there.
Yeah, I guess that does bring a little bit more professionality to it. But, I mean, until you start listening to us talk.
Then it's very apparent.
Right? I think that covers most of the like, upfront housekeeping stuff. If you're new and came to us from last week's episode of Andrew Thompson, which was just a phenomenal conversation, and again, I'm just going to give him a shout out for taking the time to come on and chat with us. But if you are new and came on to chat with us from that, welcome, and hopefully you stick around if you find something that you find valuable. If you don't listen, because there's no point in listening if you don't get any value.
True enough.
All right, so news, because we're trying to make this a short one. What do we got? You want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. I found something really interesting from my main news source, Twitter, just because it's very convenient to look for news that way, going about the normal work life. But apparently, in a post-Google safe browsing world, this Irene's posted this Medium article about GitHub now having this red splash page that says this site ahead contains harmful programs. And it's an article about how this could potentially have an effect on the open source software sharing of GitHub.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I definitely take a look at it, but playing into the whole psychology behind stuff, right? Like, people are like, big red, stop, no, don't go here, but I mean, it's GitHub.
It is. And there's a bit of a double-edged sword because it could do some damage, but like an aggressive safe browsing also isn't a horrible thing for like 90%, 99% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, like aggressive safe browsing is probably good for the majority of people. So, I mean, that's worth a thought and definitely worth a check. And as with everything, it'll be linked on the blog post that accompanies this episode, down in the bottom in the links section.
Yes, the news links section.
I can bring up an old one. Oh, no, let's not even do that. Let's start with fuck.
Well,
I can
my next
lead
one
into both of these.
Well, my next one actually feeds off of that one, too.
Okay, go ahead.
So this actually comes from Reuters directly. about U.S. legislation on the spread of cyber tools and how it has passed after this investigation. So there's new legislation about how the U.S. State Department is policing the sale of cybersecurity tools and services outside the U.S.
Interesting. So it's outside the U.S. for sale.
So the real quick here is the legislation directs the State Department to report to Congress within 90 days on how it controls the spread of cyber tools.
And to disclose any action it has taken to punish companies for violating policies.
Yeah.
So selling hacking products or services to foreign governments must obtain permission from the State Department. That's really interesting because that ties into last week really interestingly in the fact that like that could flip pretty quick and not just be about sale.
And I think that it ties in with something you have coming up too because of contractors who were working or who assisted foreign spying with the UAE.
Yeah, and we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, right? The TOTOC thing, right?
Yeah.
So TOTOC we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the United Arab Emirates basically clandestine spying messaging app that does a whole bunch of stuff, reads contacts, like takes pictures, like it can do everything. So when we talked about it, it had gotten pulled from most major app stores. Like that was just a thing. However, then it's back on Google. Like Google Play brought it back. So this is, and I talked about this on Grumpy Hackers last night, and it was a really good conversation on Grumpy Hackers. By the way, shout out to Grumpy Hackers. You should check it out. It's on Twitch TV/Grumpy Hackers. Cool group of dudes.
And they have a Discord server also.
They do. That's where they record. They said they updated the app so that now they ask you to give up permission to your contacts instead of just doing it. When Google pulled it down, it was unspecified policies, and now it's back, probably because it made it through. I'm sure Google's probably still looking into it, but where this gets even more interesting is that representatives from TOTOC are hitting up security researchers and basically asking them to publicly say that it's okay and like offering perks if you, and quid pro quo, if you promote this product. So that's really kind of interesting too. It's worth mentioning.
I actually read a tweet of someone who got hit up by that, saying to have come on. Like, I think they also did a podcast. They wanted to come on and have a narrative ready to go that they were going to talk about, and then the individual shared it on Twitter and got some immediate backlash for sharing that.
Oh yeah. And then real briefly, I'm just going to say, patch your Firefox. Critical Zero Day came out. It allows attackers to access sensitive memory locations that are normally off limits. I'm not going to explain it. It's not particularly special or really fucking cool or anything. Just patch your Firefox if you use Firefox. I do. I'm going to patch my Firefox. Just, real quick security awareness notice. So what else we got?
So I found an older one that I'd been sitting on a while and hadn't had a chance to read it, from Anton, and forgive me if I mispronounce his name because I'm a West Coast American dude. Chuvikin. He's written a bunch of... I'm not going to try. Yeah. He's written a few books that people may recognize. He does have doctor attached to his name. But he put a little rant post up about security operations centers getting into threat hunting before they have threat detection under control, and referred to this as clown grade socks and how they're still prevalent.
He listed several other things that can be referred to the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really want to talk about this, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to. Because, this is a full podcast topic that I've been waiting to have. Several things that he breaks down in here are full podcast topics that I want to have as full podcast topics. So I don't I suggest that everybody read this and it will prepare you for when we have the conversation. I don't really want to dive into it right now though, because I want to wait because I really want to go deeper than the 2 minutes that we have to cover it.
Yeah. Just as an example, he lists in bold letters here, lack any other visibility but their SIM. that is one of the topics we can completely dive into: visibility in and outside of a sim.
Yes, we can. We can also talk about threat hunting before threat detection.
Yes.
Visibility inside or outside of a sim is an interesting one, though, because it's amazing if you actually scope and are involved in the visibility process for your sim, you can get basically every fucking thing that you need there.
Mm-hmm.
So you very rarely actually do have to go outside your sim if you use it right. And the use case that he's kind of talking about is not really using it right.
Which has been my experience that's most sims in current production.
Yeah, but later. This is like my favorite sock. Like how socks work is like my favorite topic in the fucking world. So like I'm really trying to not because it needs more time than we have.
Yes. But now we've introed it, and that's kind of a teaser for some things coming up.
Yeah. So
you got one last thing for us.
I do. Did you know that contrary, like apparently threat actors just listened to the last podcast and they went out and they wrote their own framework. It's
really, that's a quick. Okay. One, I want to talk to these people to figure out their SDLC and then import that into legitimate business.
The fact that they wrote their own framework completely negates our argument from last week. Like our argument is off the table because like download string, GitHub, PowerShell Mafia, definitely your own framework. Shout out to Matt Bromley for the really good joke.
Oh my God.
But so there's some story here. Basically, Sentinel-1 found some stuff related to TrickBot. And TrickBot's a relatively cool piece of malware if you do any reading into it. Sentinel-1 then talked to Bleeping Computer, and Bleeping Computer said TrickBot gang created a custom post-exploitation framework.
Real quick, I want to interrupt you real quick. TrickBot is an evolution of the older Dire stuff, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's a really, I mean, it's very similar. It's not similar, but like it does the same kind of module-y kind of thing that a lot of other more recent malwares are doing, which is really cool. Like just general analysis of some of the commodity stuff is really interesting. But this PowerTrick thing that they're making, it's PowerShell, right? It's basically PowerShell. And then, and I want to quote specifically, aside from the PowerTrick backdoor, they also commonly utilize other PowerShell utilities. A frequent one utilized is a PowerShell stager for Metasploit. So they're still continuing to use, the open source tool. Even
that was the let me in.ps1 file they referenced, isn't it?
It was. And again, it's not that attackers don't ever make their own shit. They do. It happens. And I don't think we ever said it doesn't. But this is cool stuff, and this is stuff worth reading up about. And we'll link it because it's new and it's cool, and like it's good to be aware of.
And like the thing that's coming off the top of my head about this is in this situation, because they're able to leverage these open source exploits, they don't have to develop themselves, so they can focus their entire custom development on that initial first stage Trojan download and detection evasion.
Pretty much, yeah.
Whereas if those things necessarily weren't available, they would have had to have spread out their development resources across a wider berth.
Plus, this is out now. It's basically burned.
Yep.
But like, not going to be burned for everybody. It's still going to work. But here's what gets really interesting, and this is like the anti-reverse of the last go round, right? Shit, I gotta pull up because I think it's the Bleeping Computer article that talked about it. So, Sentinel-1 basically made a fake PowerTrick C2 for you to test your network security products. So in that case, they're back to, in this specific case, since this seemed to be one of the favorite quotes from last episode, yay. This is red teams emulating attackers, not attackers emulating red teams. So like, that's good to see. Like this I like. I like the mock command and control stuff so that we can test, because this is something that we found in the wild and it's bad, and like, it was created specifically for bad. Anyway, enough about that. We beat that topic to death last week, and I'm sure we'll continue to beat that topic to death because we can.
And it does feed into our topic today.
It does.
So, like, if
what is that topic? I forgot.
Company were to get hit by something like this, TrickBot, PowerTrick, old school Dire, that becomes like an official incident, right?
Depends on the company, but most of the time.
But generally speaking, you would invoke your incident response process and all that stuff. And we're thinking about going a little basic and just getting back to some basic incident response stuff, like going over scoping, how to determine like the effect of the incident and things like that.
Cool. That sounds like a good topic. And it's an interesting topic because, one, we're going to pull from a bunch of old episodes, right?
Yes.
Because a bunch of the stuff that we talk about in general investigation is also often part of the incident response process.
Which is a fantastic thing about being a defender, right? Like how one thing easily just flows into the next, but also that's where the real challenge is, right? Like we don't just get one area to focus on. We have to correlate information across a wide berth to try to figure out what's happening.
So there's kind of 2 points to start with. Point number 1, what is IR? What is incident response? And I want to do a little history-ish kind of thing.
I was just going to say, do we want to do a historical versus current?
I want to do a little bit of a history thing here because, even like with SANS and a bunch of other places, IR is so often tied to digital forensics. I mean, that's where DFIR comes from. And depending on your role and what you're doing, IR is often tied to digital forensics. Like, it's part of it. It's a thing sometimes. However, we kind of exist in a bit of a different world today. Technology has gone a lot farther. Endpoint technology specifically, the CrowdStrikes, the Carbon Blacks of the world, even stuff like OS Query and Windows logging.
Yeah, or even like Tanium, right? Like the tools like Tanium are able to pull things about running and spawning processes that typically needed a forensics thing going on.
Yeah, same with CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, FireEye, any of the other endpoint products, right? And you get like OS Query and all that stuff, which largely can do the same thing from an open source. Or like GR, which is Google's thing, which is still being updated. I've never played with GR, but I like its name and I think it's cool and I'm glad that it's like, available and I kind of want to play with it because of that. That said, so we've moved to a point now where like forensics is much less of a necessity. So forensics is not always going to be tied into IR. So for the use case of this episode, we're actually probably going to talk very little about forensics specifics and more about the incident response process and how you might go through that situation. There's also some downsides to the old forensic investigation methodology. So, like, this will lead into point number 2 a little bit. I spent 6 years as an incident response consultant, which means I parachuted in when there was a problem, right? Mm-hmm. And then I helped customers through breaches. That was a really cool job. But a lot of times they go, I think this box is acting up, and then they give us a box, and then we do some forensics, and we try to figure out what happened. That's cool. As time went on, though, that expands. So not only are you just doing that, you're also then tossing out an endpoint agent. You're looking for similar indicators across the entire network. That comes into the scoping part. Mm-hmm. Because digital forensics is like a mile down and an inch wide, right? Where some of your EDR technologies lets you go like quarter mile, half mile down, but like 50 miles wide.
Yep.
So you can actually figure out what's going on. Because if you just do forensics on one host and figure out exactly what happened there, and you don't have a way to range that to the rest of the network, like you have a problem.
Yeah, or how it got there in the first place, right? That's huge. The story of the incident is figuring out, well, how did this thing initially get here?
Story of the incident, yes. First thing I care about, usually not. Sometimes it depends on the situation, but usually I want to know where it is first, long before I care about how it got there. Anyway, neither here nor there. So like that's where we come into the scoping portion of this, and this is where we pull back from a lot of old episodes, right? Mm-hmm. So like, we talk about detonating. We talked about like clicking links. We talked about doing some of that detonation stuff, and then we talked about pivoting from that perspective to like see who did what at what stage throughout the course of your network, throughout your entire network, like, and not tipping off the attacker until you fully understand what's going on, especially if you're a hands-on keyboard attacker or dealing with a potential hands-on keyboard attacker. Like, scoping is arguably probably the most important part of any investigation.
I mean, ultimately, it seems like that goes back to the business side of once you figure out the scoping of it, what is the actual business potential impact that leads into either personal safety or monetary?
Mm-hmm. Or data loss.
Yeah.
Which I guess is usually monetary, but not always.
I mean, with a lot of compliance stuff now, data loss usually does end in some sort of monetary loss.
Yeah. I'm thinking like my time in the government. Where monetary was never a concern.
Yeah, government world is a little bit different from the private corporate sector.
Yep. So you end up asking this really important question, and like one of the big keys for an IR person is to make sure that like they keep a pretty cool head throughout that situation. Like you can't get all worked up, right? Like, oh my God, the world's burning down. We got to go pull plugs.
Yeah. That
can do a lot of damage. Like a lot of damage really quickly, because if you don't fully understand what's going on and you start acting, you can hurt yourself, because you have to make a risk decision in there about, do I is this so damaging that I need to pull the plug now and risk that consequence that like they're going to trash or dump or whatever? Or can I wait and watch and scope and figure it out?
Yeah, and so that becomes an interesting conversation that you really have to take the individual market that the organization is in. Because my experience with the utility sector is pulling the plug is almost never an option, because that will lead has a high likelihood of leading to an actual power outage, especially if it's connected to healthcare or a hospital or something like that. I've had a number of people say that even if they know it's infected and there's active data exfiltration, if it's on a system that's related to service, they leave it going until they can figure out another way to swap it out.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some companies where pulling the plug is just never an option.
Yeah.
Like, that matters. But it all comes down to the individual situation and the company that you're with, right? Like, what decision do you make and when? And can you do it with a relatively cool head?
The cool head is the biggest part, because I know in the SOC, a lot of the analysts, if they haven't been involved in an incident, that first response is to get all excited, not because that they're happy that something bad is happening, but they're actually able to engage something and get their brain going.
I want to clear up a general myth, though. We as incident response people or detection people or find badness people, this might be horrible. Who knows? But we absolutely get excited when something bad happens.
Yeah.
Like,
my point is, we're not excited that it's bad. We're excited that something's happening.
That's fair. But
Yeah.
like when something's happening, it's bad. Like,
Yes.
like, oh my God, like this shit's interesting. We need to dig in right now. And oh God, like the company's probably going to lose so much money, but like I'm having a fun day.
Exactly.
The problem is 3 months later into that investigation, when you're locked in a room with a bunch of people every day and eating crap food because you're having it delivered in and working long nights or working overnight or sleeping in your chair, it's not so much fun after that.
No, and like the day of, it's not uncommon in that situation for communications to get all blown out of proportion, because 3 different people will be doing the same work and returning different information to the stakeholders and the people that make the real business decision.
Oh, yeah. So that kind of brings us into point 2 a little bit. And before we go further down this, let's talk about point 2. There's huge differences between outsourced and internal, right? In both job function, what they do, how they view the world, all that. You know, I did outsourced for a while. Outsourced IR people tend to view the world through the lens of outsourced IR. So it's always a breach. It's always bad. You should always do this. Like, they don't necessarily always have that holistic view. It's not always true, but it's sometimes true.
And then the internal people, from my experience, have been usually kind of the opposite way. Like, it's not as bad as we think it is. And besides, in order to figure it out, we have to talk to like these 13 other business organizations to try to get an idea about what's actually happening.
Yeah, because they know all those people, right?
Yep.
Like, they know what that looks like.
Yep.
So there's that side of it too. There's, you know, and there's always the possibility that your internal IR team might call in an external IR team. Because when you literally spend your whole day working breaches, like, that's what you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, internal IR teams don't necessarily spend every day working a breach. If they do, that's a really fucked up company.
And the other thing that I learned that was, for me, I was shocked at how surprising this was to me, regarding insurance. That there are some policies regarding these things that calling in the external organization, they can get it paid out by insurance or have less fight back from an insurance company if there's some sort of payout from like cyber insurance.
That's correct. And part of that is because IR companies are starting to partner with insurance firms to a certain extent. So like if you have a breach and you contact your cyber insurance firm, they give you the IR company that you're going to be partnering with. And that IR company technically kind of works for the insurance company, not the other company.
Yeah, and then there was like a whole bunch of like not as much out of pocket money coming up front to pay for it and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Now that raises a lot of interesting questions about like who are they actually there to support and what does that look like? But also neither here nor there. Really, I mean, you could talk about that for a while. But like, so you scope your incident, you figure out what's going on, then you kind of weigh business risk. And genuinely, you don't want to weigh your risk until you understand both your incident and any possible blind spots that you have, right? That's when you start to put together, you make a path and you start to put together your story. Do we need to do forensics? Do we need to do log research? Do we need to pull plugs? Like, you start to make all these questions after you have scoped and determined your risk and your blind spots.
Yeah, and the other thing that I learned that was super important too was even if you know what's going on, to make sure to have the organizations like incident response plan and business continuity plan and stuff like that readily available, because there's also like in those plans you have their risk appetite, that organization's risk appetite already scoped out, so you can figure out and then compare once you've scoped what's actually happening with what the business has deemed as acceptable risk versus not.
Mm-hmm. But never be too strict on an IR plan. Like, try to follow it the best you can, but like also be inventive and interested and think outside the box when you can, and then update the incident response plan.
Exactly. It is supposed to be a living document. I mean, like the best ones that I've seen were living documents.
Oh yeah, they need to change. So you're basically, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're building all this. You're doing all this to build a story. And this isn't different looking at an individual alert or looking at a massive breach. You're building a story of what happened. That's what we do. That's what detectives do. Mm-hmm. Okay? Wink, wink.
And that's what we love about it, right? That whole detective trying to figure out the story. Like, it's a jigsaw puzzle. We get to fit the pieces together and like, what is this actually telling us?
Typically, in a breach case, it's just a much bigger story than in an individual alert. Sometimes the individual alert turns into a breach. But when you get into the IR situation, really, you're still telling stories. You're just telling bigger stories. You're writing bigger books.
And I think the telling the story is like the key to from the technical to business communication aspect. Because if you just did like a copy and paste of the alerts and some event logs or leftover host or network artifacts, like management isn't going to know what to think of any of that. They're not going to have the same knowledge to do it, so that when you are able to put the story together, that they can understand. And
then let's talk about the most important thing that comes after this. You've told your story, you've cleaned up, you've done all that. Because again, we're 10,000 feet view right now. Right? Mm-hmm. Then you look at all of that data and you go, how do I detect this in the future? How do I make sure that I can find this and this doesn't happen again? What security controls do I need? What technology do I need? What detections do I need? Those are all things that should come out of any incident response, like a firm and formal remediation and ability to keep something from happening again. It's one of your best use cases. And if you're a company who has suffered a breach, it's honestly your best bet for budget. I used to tell clients that. If you want money, now's the time. Like, you just had a breach. there's never been a better time to justify the shit that you need than right now.
Yep, when everyone's feeling the pain of a breach.
Yep. So make sure that like you're documenting this, you're explaining it, and then you can go and you can be like, well, if we had EDR, we wouldn't have this problem. Or like, oh, well, these are all the remediation stuff that we can do where we are now. It'll get us this far. Now we need to get that far. These are the things that can get us there that cost money. Like, that part is not talked about a lot in the IR world, like in the IR conversation from what I see, but it's so freaking important because it's all about building a living system and a living setup.
It really is. And talking about how do we detect this in the future, I think we can move on to talking specifically about PowerTrick again and some ways we could detect that.
Yeah, let's do that because that's a cool thing right now, given that it's this whole big custom framework.
Now, one of the things that jumped out to me immediately when I was reading these articles is even the initial stages was still using PowerShell. Correct. And how we talked about previously when we were talking about detections in PowerShell, doing web requests from PowerShell directly using like the net.web client.
Yep. We talked about execution policy bypass and window style hidden quite a bit, which they do that too.
Yep. Now, I was also keen to see that they were still using an old tactic of running the executable from user app data local.
So, fun fact. Why is that a thing?
Runs in user space.
There's another reason too, though.
Shoot.
App data and program data are what Windows calls enhanced privilege folders. They don't rely solely on user privileges to execute things in that space. Because so many applications need more than user privileges, so like things exist there, like several browsers can exist in that space. So, and I'm sure that somebody will call me out and be like, "You're full of shit," but I'm pretty sure that I remember this right.
Please do loudly and tag me on Twitter when you do.
Do it. Like, teach me something. I'm fine with that. Like, I don't know all the shit. Like, teach me stuff. But like, there is a concept of enhanced privileges that exist with that folder. Because that way you can lock down like the rest of a user's setup without having a general concern about some of your applications not being able to run or communicate.
But then it also becomes very easy to detect normal user behavior from this kind of malicious behavior in that a user is not going to be executing stuff from there. Typically what you're going to see is like the Windows services executing stuff from that location.
Correct. So detecting off of things running in app data and program data are incredibly useful.
Yep. Yeah, and that just goes back into the whole like normal user behavior, thinking like normal users don't make web calls from CLI or PowerShell directly, typically. Mm-hmm. That's usually an admin or someone on your network doing things they're not supposed to be doing.
Then there's some really interesting stuff, and it's a little bit harder. So one that's not is video card file directory changes, which happened in this case. That one's really interesting for a couple of reasons, but specifically, like, there's a lot of malware that fucks with, like, video card directories and stuff. But more interesting, and one that I'm kind of interested to take on, is this hex in the command line. Same with base64 in the command line. Any kind of encoding that passes through command line is never really going to be done by a human being. Like, people aren't base64ing their fucking PowerShell commands before they hit run, or in this case, hexing them.
Yeah, and I think in this case, the hex was literal custom-written shellcode.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So that, I can't remember if it was executed through PowerShell or not, but either way, you're not seeing that kind of stuff a lot. It doesn't happen a lot.
I mean, the only legitimate case that I've seen base64 encoded was web admins doing it to web servers, and they had a very specific use case because an application they were running on it didn't parse a specific special character.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could see that.
But then you have known behavior, right? Coming from
you
a
can
thing.
tune that known behavior.
Exactly.
Cool. I mean, I think that covers it, right? We're early tonight, which is nice. We've given you so many long episodes. We didn't want to force you to listen to us talk too long this time.
Yes. Besides, we like to suck the air of the room anyway.
We do.
So
that's it. Take us out.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. And remember to go forth and find badness.
Take care.